So what we wanted to do, well, what I wanted to do, and I know you wanted to do as well, is like talk about some things that with like some sort of like format to do it, not just like we're just talking in a regular way, because it happens and you can have great conversations, but when we have a topic, some things in mind, then it enables it for us to maybe have like talk about things that we are not necessarily used to talking. For me, that's what I want to do. I want to like maybe touch on something that I wouldn't bring up, especially when thinking about things to myself. And you had an idea. You had an idea about that's all about the future and stuff like that. And I think we mentioned it recently in our own server a little bit when we were talking about the future of the free world or whatever. So, what was your main idea around it? So we can start discussing it. What were the things that that you wanted to discuss yourself when it comes to that topic?
Right. I think because we decided that we'll take things. Well, we have like three main ideas, right?
Yeah.
And I think we decided on a little flow. The future, it was more the future and free will,
Hmm.
really. But I think we've docked that for last for now.
Yeah. Okay.
So, yeah, for now, I had in mind that we could discuss censorship, whether it be a governmental group, social media, any sort of censorship in general. We could discuss its how appropriate it is, whether or not it should exist, and in what scenarios it should and it shouldn't. What's your opinion on censorship, Theo?
Okay, well, for me, censorship, I think it's one of those topics that, again, I think most topics will like create real polarization in our society. But I think when it comes to censorship, I think with the rise of having of everyone having a voice around the world, there will be a little bit of a focus on like censorship becoming like a big part of the interactions between people these days. We'll have, for example, someone giving their opinion on something. We'll have, might it be a celebrity or just like a random person. Oh, here goes this
I'm
guy.
still here. Sorry,
Okay, okay. No, you're
I'm
good,
still
you're
here.
good.
Don't worry, keep talking.
Okay,
I'm
okay.
just fixing my shit.
Um, but yeah, essentially, you will have someone that gives out their opinion on something, and might it be again a celebrity or just a random person. And I think censorship becomes like a big part of what people consider as their own rights. So we're talking again about not like government censorship or anything like that, but we're just talking about specific things that can be done or said, and just people kind of losing their rights over specific things. And I have a feeling that as a person who I guess comes from a background where it's not like we all come from countries where there is a certain level of censorship, but it's not like in an extreme level like some countries might have it. So my personal experience isn't too there isn't too much of that. I've always been, and especially within my education, it's always been like pretty open about what you can express yourself about, what you can say, what you can do. However, I really do think that it goes beyond just what governments allow these days, and it goes more towards maybe like a little more of like a right that people like to exert on each other, with like the will of like having some sort of expression like on social media, but it comes in a lot of different forms, and people will start to believe that let's just say that having an opinion can be like a sort of way to gather or split apart different groups. And with censorship, there comes this kind of like feeling of power, maybe like a little bit of power for certain people that think, yeah, I have this little like I kind of feel I can have power over someone because I can tell them that it's wrong to act or be this way. And I think that I don't know how recent that is, but I think it's something that for me, I've seen it more as like the more people use social media, the more people, in the last, let's say, last maybe 5 to 10 years, I've been seeing it much more. Maybe that's just me growing as a person and noticing that more, which is totally possible because what, let's say 5 years ago, I would have been 17, sorry. So between being 17 and 22, there's a bit of, yeah, there's a few years there that, and when you grow up as an adult and you're not like a kid living at your parents anymore, for example, like my experience, you're just like, you start to notice when people like to take power over others, and you start to notice what you're capable of doing because you're not like a little kid that just stays at home, does his thing. You actually kind of like have your own voice and have your rights to like vote, for example, and stuff like that. So yeah, that's kind of like my view, and it's more personal than like what I see society kind of like going through. But I do notice that yeah, like there is, it comes a lot from people who kind of decide what's right and wrong, and it also comes from governments depending on the country and stuff. But I feel like people have a lot of say in things, so it's kind of in a way promising, but also in a way a little scary because you have people deciding what others can and cannot do. So that's kind of how I see it.
I think that's a very interesting take on censorship.
Mm.
I do agree with quite a lot of what you said. Definitely, I do believe that at least nowadays there are plentiful examples of censorship. I also believe what you might have started kind of adding in on there
Mm.
was more of a moral standing
Yeah.
or kind of the right thing to do, I guess, quote unquote. Because fundamentally, I think there is a difference between censorship and being told what is the correct thing to do, right?
Yeah.
Um, I think censorship is more about the availability and travel and the ability to share information. I think it's way more about information. Because I think that okay, it you could really go about it both ways because you can prevent someone from doing something by either A, threatening them.
Mm.
They already know what this action is and what its consequences are, and you tell them, hey, if you do this, we'll do something bad to you. In this case, I do not think this is censorship. This is more of, well, threat.
Yeah.
Um, you can be threatened into believing something else, saying something else, but fundamentally it's not censorship. Or you could be get someone not to do something by never introducing the concept to them,
Mm.
and that would be censorship. Removing the ability to kind of identify an idea, or just all in all not be able to know about it, and kind of removing the means of knowing about it, that is, I think, censorship. Just removing the information alone would be censorship. Preventing someone from doing something, I don't think necessarily comes into censorship because I think, for example, laws, a lot of things that you can or cannot do, or even as children, when we're told we can't do this, we can't do that. You mentioned that earlier. Um, Obviously sometimes we're not told things because we're children, or our parents don't believe, our teachers don't believe, or our guardians don't believe that it's not the right time to conversate or to acknowledge a certain matter. But a lot of times we're just told not to do something for the sake of don't do it.
Yeah.
um, I think censorship, but I do think that it's actually really worth bringing up censorship in this context and the family context, especially in children,
Mm.
because we do censor stuff from children. And, I mean, this is the most classic, the most like, common type of censorship. Censorship against materials that are not safe for work, censorship that go things that are into too explicit, certain uses of language or anything like that. These are all things that we keep away from children. And I think actually this is a topic really worth discussing, because I mean, obviously, neither of us are very well versed in child psychology
Yeah.
or anything like that,
Yeah.
so it'll be tough to go too deep into it. But I think it is. I think this is where I want to start picking up on where is censorship appropriate, and why is it in these cases appropriate? Why is it in others that it's not?
Yeah. You know, this actually is quite a good point to make for me to reflect on, considering that I have to think in my professional life a lot of the time about the place that censorship might have in what I do, which in education, again, it kind of depends what I'm doing, what I'm teaching. Because, for example, when I'm teaching the youngest of children, they're not going to understand if I bring in some a little bit more complex context. So I have to kind of explain to them something with very simple words, and we might not even touch on a topic like this one. But whenever I'm teaching kids that are a little bit older, you have to start explaining, not necessarily again because what's right or wrong is a little bit of a different thing, but more specifically in this case with the children, let's say, that are older than 6, for the most part, when they kind of get to start to want to understand how our world functions, what you can't do, what is right and what is wrong, and and I do think that bringing up the fact that bringing up children and education is very important, because that's again where everything really starts for a human being in their development and how they become an adult further on. But obviously, as a child, you build a lot of what you understand to be right or wrong, what you understand to be something that you should maybe be doing and what you shouldn't, because there's obviously extremes. And the problem that I do think is that we introduce a lot of things as very extreme just because for children to understand that something is like absolutely unacceptable and something is absolutely something that you should do is kind of easier. But what I've noticed as a slight issue, and sometimes some teachers are really good at dealing with it, is basically to introduce these things as such extremes and never really break apart the fact that not everything is fully black or white, and there's a lot of gray in the middle. That some things are somewhat acceptable, some things are okay with certain people, and that makes it very complicated, I think, for children. And that's why having a voice of guidance that can give them like the real ability to like differentiate like what's really problematic or what's sometimes acceptable. And I think, yeah, I think without the guidance, it creates the people that in the future, when they will grow up, will maybe struggle to understand why they can and can't say that, or they will be disruptive to society. And that's why I think that, like, I think the children I teach are very privileged, because we have a lot of teachers for a small amount of children a lot of the time in the international community, for example. But I can only imagine that in public education, when you have like ginormous groups and just one teacher telling them, hey, say that, don't say that, it becomes quite problematic. So there's a big role in parents. And I was wondering if you had a say about what do you think the parental role is also in censorship, perhaps with your own experience or the experience of people that you know.
Um, Very nice question. I personally believe that, I mean, absolutely, all that you said is correct. I do believe that guidance is an important part of a child's life, especially, as such an impressionable, well, person, and at such an age. Personally, and I think this really actually differs quite a lot depending on who you ask. And I think censorship should be looked as a tool, um, fundamentally only to help with the development of a human person, a young human person.
Yeah.
In terms of my view and stand, okay, actually, let me answer your question first. Um, I personally, obviously, as we have all, I've been a child. Fucking huzzah. Um, However, I, as a child, actually, I underwent a lot of, or I took notice of quite a bit of censorship. I was. Uh, I was quite a let's say more of a tech smart kid when I was younger. And my father saw this, and he obviously tried to introduce immediate blocks on websites, internet, things that, just to make sure that I'm kept in a confined space. I don't go out fucking on the internet and just begin looking through whatever it has. And let's be honest, the internet in 2010s wasn't any better than it is now. Maybe even worse in terms of actually how hidden things were. God, I remember YouTube from back then. It was tragic. Okay, anyway, uh, off rail. My point is that I remember this actually quite well. Though he would have a program installed on, I think I had a tablet of some sort, maybe, and this program would essentially just make sure to limit uh, any traffic flow or anything like that just to specific websites, or to just have a whitelist of websites that I can go to. Now, obviously, I figured out pretty fast how to deal with this. My first steps were, okay, quite often the program, because it was a whitelist program, and if I needed to access a website that was okay for me to access, I'd have to go to my father. He would unlock it if anything added to the whitelist, whatever. Okay, peek at the password. Easy, done. Okay,
Hey.
all right. And I'd get by like that. Okay, he realized this. And he would change the password. He would then make sure that I don't look and so on. I eventually figured out, I can just factory reset my damn thing and it will just work completely flawlessly. And I did as a child because of this. I was actually exposed to quite a lot of things, and I won't go into detail, that I shouldn't have been as a child. And when I say child, I don't mean like 16, 15. I mean like as young as 9, 10 even. Um, just a lot of things that are probably not the best for a young mind. And I think, rounding back to what I wanted to talk about earlier, this is where censorship comes in to be very useful. I think censorship almo is an awful idea, with the only exception being for the betterment, and I mean this literally, psychologically speaking, the betterment of a child's development. Uh, what I mean by that, it's obviously I don't know details, and you'd have to speak to a professional. I know, however, that depending on what someone or just children are exposed to at a young age, it changes how they grow and how they change in their thinking, how they develop incredibly, absolutely massive, massive impact on how they turn out to be. And this includes any sort of materials that, any sort of materials, language, anything really that we might not view nowadays as child friendly. For example, let's say not safe for work material. This can really desensitize a child. It can also change a child's way of thinking and just potentially develop them to being an adult that is way more seeking in the area to an extreme degree, developing certain fetishizations or anything like that to fulfill that gap that they've developed because of the fact that they've been exposed to such material as a child, or like crude language, swearing, and so on, while not immediately obvious, it actually does affect self-control in some sense. Being able to control when you swear or like when you use certain language in certain scenarios is a fundamental skill of an adult. But if as a child you're raised with parents that kind of just, swing around fucking shit all the time, you're really not gonna get to, learn that at all as even common sense. Mm, So, obviously there's the whole debate of, oh, well, should these words be like used as crude words? But I think this is a whole other topic. The point is that it does do this. It does lower kind of the self-control, even outside of the words, just the attitude. It completely does, I believe, just change how you think about your attitude and in front of different audiences and so on. Uh, yeah, but that's pretty much my only reason, or the only reason I think that censorship should be even put into place. What do you think?
Yeah. So I do like the that you make the point that it should be something that's not exactly strictly for education and stuff like that, but I think it should be something that definitely, is limited to specific things, and we don't make it obviously something that really ends up controlling people's lives. And what I do like about a lot of the points that you made is that obviously, instead of always opting for strict censorship, we could have alternatives that do help people understand, what could end up being like the right way to approach things, to learn about something, to discover something. Because obviously we're talking that before the age of the internet, there could have been a lot more situation in which a parent has to introduce their child to what reproduction is and how it works, instead of the child running into like some sort of pornographic material on the internet. And I think that changes a lot, and this is why there is, again, and I come back to this topic just because of my, like, experience and the fact that I do work in education. I always think about how important it is to for children to be introduced to things in a way that is more balanced than anything. When we don't throw in, again, it was about the extremes, but we don't throw in the idea that there should be strict censorship on everything, but instead we have censorship to an extent, obviously, to keep things from being absolute chaos. But then we also have, emphasizing, like, media literacy, and like just like the digital responsibility of like owning a device and being able to have the access to the internet, and just having good critical thinking skills as well. Because as a child, you think of in a very different way than an adult does, and when you start creating laws and creating restrictions for children and stuff, it's important to think like how a child would think, because a child wouldn't necessarily have the same way of dealing with a specific thing as an adult would, of course. But as an adult, we usually kind of forget how we would approach things as a child. And I think that we bring in the topic of early childhood so much because it does, as you said, if a child learns about a specific thing at a young age, and then that can lead to a whole different adult by the end of their growth. And so it's important to think, about like how we introduce certain things to children. And at the end of the day, you can't censor everything. You can't block out the access to every possible thing. There will always be alternatives. There will, like, as you said yourself, your dad was stopping you from, and you just peeked at the password and were able to sort things out yourself. And next thing you actually do have access to the things he didn't want you to have access to. So it's a very simple example, but very powerful, because that in itself shows that simple censorship won't always be the solution, and a lot of time won't be the solution, because there will always be ways around things. And myself, I have some experience which is not exactly based around censorship itself, but my mother liked to always take control of specific things, and that usually causes a little bit of a conflict, but also causes more of a drive for the child who's being stopped from doing all sorts of things, to actually end up going forth and finding a solution to actually do what they're not allowed to do. So but I think that's human nature as well. And I think that same thing with China, the US trying to ban TikTok recently, people trying to find another alternative, like immediately, like you're trying to do something, but people always try to find another solution. And I think that shows a lot about human nature, and it shows a lot about how censorship doesn't like specifically have the effect that you would expect for it to have. And I think that finding alternatives that kind of make you learn and grow and improve are always going to have more impact on the long term than to just completely stop something from even having the potential of happening. Because we always find a way to do what we want to do if we really want to do it. And the more something matters to you, the more you rely on something, the more you will do whatever it takes to end up either consuming that content, either learning about something, understanding something, or having your right to do anything, really. So I think taking the example of how a child would react to something is, interestingly enough, actually quite similar to how adults end up reacting. But it's important to go back to the roots and understand that we start as a child with our understanding of the world, and it will evolve as we interact with different types of content and different new concepts come to us. So we should always be focused on how we introduce things in the first place. So that's why I appreciate, in my personal experience in my job, that I get this chance to introduce things in a right way, where it's not always about don't do this, don't do that, don't do that, but more like what you should do, maybe. So yeah.
Absolutely. I like that you mentioned actually the recent ban on TikTok in the US, which I believe has been reverted already.
Yeah.
Didn't last that long. Quite a lot there actually, quite a lot to talk about. Definitely a big part in censorship, and I think actually quite funnily enough, this is uh, it's a tough one because it's not exactly censorship in the goal of limiting knowledge, but censorship in the goal of acquiring or benefiting in another way. In this case, the US pretty much saying, or the idea being originally that TikTok was going to be banned in order so things like Instagram Reels or YouTube Shorts could flourish more, and it would be more of more American corporations getting that audience rather than Chinese corporations. Um, so I think that's actually a really nice reminder that censorship isn't even always about, I think you mentioned this earlier as well, isn't always about limiting knowledge. It's also about sometimes a sense of power. In this case, monetary gain. Um, there's really a lot of reasons that censorship is done for, absolutely like tons. Um, and also going back to the point that you made, I absolutely agree that it is not a direct way to deal with anything. Censorship and just trying to limit knowledge is perhaps the most awful thing that you could do because human beings, and in fact, any or most living things, are curious. That's how we came from, depending on how you and what you believe. This is how we came to be essentially as living things, is curiosity, is trying things, trying to solve problems. Problem solving is pretty much our specialty as a species. That's what we thrive on. So, you give someone a challenge and they'll fucking take it up, especially if it's something as grand as limited knowledge. Now, obviously, this can be also challenged in another way. What if you just introduce the idea of censorship from young in a way that challenge, that critical thinking of being able to solve through that and break through that censorship doesn't even occur to you. For example, let's take into account, for example, China, right? Uh, sure, very many people know huge censorship issue there. People born in that society, unless told by their parents, which is already a huge risk, and so probably won't be, they'll grow up in a society full of censorship and see it as a normal thing. In fact, I think a lot of Chinese citizens already do. I've heard stories of people that live in China moving to outside of China and realizing, holy shit, you know, you can literally fucking go and do anything on the internet without problem. I was actually looking into it a tad bit beforehand, and China, as a as a country, pretty much not only does it censor URLs and just an insane amount of different content online, it has whole organizations of thousands of people that watch over user-generated content. Just absolutely massive centers of people just sitting down at their desks and looking at the video, seeing if it's like, good to go up or not. So, you know, when you're sealing like this envelope so tightly, you're gonna have people that eventually just don't know what it is to not be censored. And when you don't have that idea of freedom, or of freedom of knowledge, or freedom of speech, or just like the ability to know outside of what you're fed, what do you do then? Because that ideology, it's hard to come by naturally, especially when it's curated in a sense that you won't ever get it from an outside source, most likely.
You know, about China specifically, because I think it's a prime example of censorship in our modern world, as one of the leading world powers, and yet its people are truly limited in a lot of ways. Of course, some could, again, I'd like to take the be the devil's advocate a little bit and think about how the people themselves would really be feeling about such a thing. Because, of course, if you grow up and you're accommodated to a specific way of life and you kind of just get used to, not knowing much about this and that and not even knowing something exists, like you can just take any information and that's obvious for Westerners, for example, and then an average Chinese citizen would have absolutely no idea, and we live a very content life without having the knowledge of any specific topic. And I think China likes to throw excuses or reasons. I'd like to just like find myself in the middle and try to understand where they come from, where they try to why would they have the censorship in the first place, to preserve maybe the cultural and moral values of the country, and they try to, I guess that's how they try to present themselves around it, amongst other reasons. And I think that that there's a lot of talk about there, as you were saying, because you could try to understand where a country might be coming from, if they would be trying to protect their people, whatever, from the information going around the world. But I also understand the opposing opinion of that you have to let people know what the world really is. What I where I draw the line a lot of the time is to falsify certain things and leave out very important pieces of information about historical events, or about just specific situations going on in the present time as well. I think that we as humans should just simply all have the right to know what's going on if that information is available to other humans out there. And I think what China does might have this kind of like a hint of like a good intention behind it, that they try to bring it out as oh, we're trying to protect our people and protect the children, and it's like an ethical and legal responsibility for us to just like keep our people informed about the right things and not have some sort of like propaganda from the West. But what really seems to be a problem for me, and this is why like I think it's going too far already, how they're censoring a lot of things over there, is just that people don't have access to knowledge. And I think we all have the right, like as humans, to just have that access to that knowledge. And I think we came to somewhat of a conclusion about the fact that yes, for children there should be an idea of what should be censored just to protect the innocence of a child. But I do think that besides that, what they do in China, amongst other countries as well, but even in the West to an extent, although it's not exactly censorship, and we can bounce back on that topic, but in the West, we like to have the media represent other countries and others, situations, places, people in a certain way. We liked the media likes to have a very specific image of how some things are that might not actually be that truthful. And that would be censorship in itself. It wouldn't be censorship, but it would be, I guess, also misinformation in some sort of way, and it's very normalized. And I think that that could be something that we would what we talk about now. Like why, how do you inform yourself as an average human? Like how do you inform yourself without feeling like it is very politically charged what you see and what you and what opinion you end up having? And is it even possible to have an opinion that won't be labeled as being like very political, and that you won't be labeled as being part of a specific group? Can you have your own opinion and express it and not be labeled? How does it look in this climate of the internet?
I I personally think that it's all very subjective,
Mm.
obviously. We're talking about concepts that are human and human alone. They are not set in stone for anyone or anything else. And therefore, these concepts should definitely derive from humans themselves. You were talking about the consumption of information or how you can inform yourself. I mean, this goes back to more of this goes back to, in a sense, what do you want to know and how do you want to think? There's always a bias. It's hardly ever that someone comes into a topic with a completely blank slate. I mean, you obviously hear something first and then you want to inform yourself on it. Um, as it is right now, I think there are very few services that provide, in a sense, a range of opinions on a single topic. I think I heard this, and I haven't checked out the service myself, so don't take my word for
Mm.
anything here. I think it was called, God, if I only remembered. Very they did a few sponsorships, I believe, even on YouTube. This service that will take different news outlets,
Mm.
and compare how, for example, right winged or left winged they are, and what they tend to support, and then they'll take the news titles, compare them, in a sense, would give you, hey, look, this is more of a right-leaning outlet. This is how they're presenting the news. This is more of a left-leaning outlet. This is how they're presenting their news, right? And then they will obviously have some that are kind of more neutral. Um, but I think it is genuinely based a lot on how you want what you want to consume, because I think it's quite frankly, I think it's a non-obvious thing, but well, non-obvious thing unless you think about it a bit. People don't necessarily always want to have a neutral standpoint. A lot of times people do want to pick a side. uh, and I think that we as human beings, I mean, going back to the conversation all the way back to the black and white, we as human beings prefer simplicity. Therefore, we prefer when there is a right or a wrong, just simply one or the other. Whereas in most, if not every case, that is not the truth. And I don't think that is a strange idea. There was actually this meme, and quite frankly, I'm going to use a meme for this
Oh,
because I
great.
think it's quite actually it's quite a good one. I cannot reference it exactly, but it was like, who would you rather have as your leader, right? And it have I think it would have like, okay, person A, this person would drink, cheated on their wife, and I don't know, did something else. Person B, this person did not graduate like a proper, like, I don't know, political school, and I don't know, did some other dumb shit. Person C, fucking, led a country through a revolution successfully, with great success. Great. Repeating myself there. And I don't know, was famed by many as a great historical figure during his time. Okay, and then it was like, okay, revealing the people. You have like fucking Churchill, person A, like, I don't know, someone else, person B, and then you have fucking Hitler as person C, and it's like, it's putting in that bias, of making people, for example, in this case, and I think this is why the meme is a wonderful representation of this. Uh, no one would tell you that Hitler would be a good leader. By no, well, unless you're
Yeah.
obviously like,
Some people might, you know.
yeah, unless you're inclined towards his ideology.
Yeah.
But by common sense, I'll say and I'll claim right now, nobody would tell you, under all the things that Hitler has done, Hitler is a good leader.
Mm.
However, if you are presented with the information that the meme would present you with, which is essentially, it would tell you more personal things or things that just simply avoid the grander picture, you would tend to think, okay, this person is a good person. Because nobody thinks, hey, okay, this person might have cheated on their wife, this person might have like a drinking problem, but is that the whole picture? Is it mean that they are a bad person overall? And to be honest, fuck ton of people will default to that. Absolutely, a grand like because it's just a simpler thing to do. It's a simpler thing to think that something is good because it has a few good reasons to be good, and something is bad because it has a few bad reasons to be bad. Um, I believe that rolling back a bit, it is in terms of what your consumption should be on social media or like on the internet in general. I think, as you mentioned earlier in the conversation, that having kind of this etiquette, self-awareness, and kind of being able to know how things work, how you work as a person, I think it's really important for people to understand how they work. Because if you know how you work, then you can prevent yourself from spiraling down certain rabbit holes or trying to just dig too deep into a topic when you really shouldn't be. Because obsession can also lead to obviously extreme opinions. Um, I think it's important to have that self-control, to have that. I can't remember the exact words you used. You were talking about raising children with a certain what was it now? You used a certain phrase, but let's just call it the know-how of how to search the internet, how to
Yes.
look for certain things the correct way. Um, and I think it's also important that you realize, that people realize in general, um, that things like good things or bad things are, again, as I mentioned earlier, purely subjective. Some people might not see certain tidbits of information as badly as you do, or you might see certain tidbits of information better than some others do. Um, it's really, I think the key takeaway is that it's complex, and you have to remember it is complex. It's never as simple as, and going back to, for example, reading about the news, reading one like a news article from one publisher and making that your key takeaway. I mean, if you want to just quickly bring yourself up to speed with what happened, sure. However, even then, it's better to just double check with another source because the fact that they might have left out details, or they might have worded something in a certain way. And I think, quite frankly, I think we can sort of segue here, if you wouldn't mind, um, to the talk of social media and slightly change the subject from this consumption of uh, information and censorship to just consumption overall. And how does it actually affect somebody? This is going. I'm trying to aim this topic more towards um, uses of social media, more specifically social media such as Instagram, TikTok, anything that is more related to more fast-paced and even messaging apps to some extent. More fast-paced. I mean, Discord as well. Dopamine-inducing platforms. How do these affect our minds, not just now, but we're seeing a grand example of how they're affecting the younger generation. So how do these affect people in different stages of life? What are the consequences and why?
Social media is pretty much the most powerful tool in the world now, simply due to the amount of users that are actively utilizing those platforms. It's just, I mean, the sheer amount of people that can not only communicate, which is a good thing and a lot of the time, but also you know receive a lot of information on a daily basis about what interests them. Most of the time, the algorithms are set up to feed you what you want to see. a lot of the time. And I think with social media, there are major issues that touch a lot of different layers, a lot of different fields within society, within an individual's ability to understand like the world, to understand even themselves to an extent, which is the really terrifying part in my opinion, is that social media, especially with short form content, which we're going to talk about, right, the dopamine inducing stuff, short form content, specifically in the last few years, when that's become a huge part of, you know, of that consumption, a lot of people are just doom scrolling all day. It feeds you specifically at what's made for you, but the algorithms are set up in such a way, and I'm sure you have knowledge about that yourself, like about how those algorithms for things like TikTok and Instagram Reels and stuff like that will like really cater people with like specifically the with all sorts of data. They will find what's, you know, for you specifically, but also, and this part is the part that's kind of scary and a little crazy to me, I don't even know how that's legal per se, but a lot of time they will find exactly something that will, I guess, affect you emotionally on a specific level, and it will kind of manipulate your emotional state, because you'll find a video that will, for example, be like one of those edits of something a little sad happening, but then the more you watch these because you're intrigued with what's going on, the more you get some of those. If it's about dogs and it's sad, there's going to be more dogs and more sadness going on. And so yeah, on an individual level for every single user, and there's plenty of users of social media, that will also impact your life and your view on different things. And also as society in itself, there are huge issues going on there. I mean, for the main thing that I wanted to bring up, because it connects to the topic that we were just talking about, you know, social media, when it comes to sharing your opinion or receiving somebody else's opinion and flocking towards that, with social media, you know, there's such a thing that is not a new concept to social media, but it's omnipresent in social media in comparison to, you know, any other form of media in the past. It is the real echo chambers that end up creating themselves among different platforms. I'm talking Twitter specifically, but we can even mention other platforms in which a single opinion will resonate, you know, forever inside of a bubble, and people will consider that as the way to view any specific topic, or the, you know, what's the values to be had and what's morally right or wrong really becomes what that community or bubble or, you know, echo chamber really ends up, you know, like having going on. So we have, for example, an opinion about a specific matter of injustice towards a specific group, or a specific matter of a very specific situation that happens somewhere, and it can become so much more important to those people because of that echo chamber they're in. And the issue with social media is that you can easily get kind of trapped inside of that echo chamber, because instead of having, you know, all sorts of different information coming in, again, it's algorithms, so your feed can end up showing only that kind of opinion. And your feed can either be like in a reinforcing manner where it's about a specific topic and everyone thinks the same about something, like we support that, or alternatively it could also be very much against a specific person group. And I think that in itself is one of the many issues that social media presents. But I think that those echo chambers, when it comes to those opinions, can really create, it's a phenomenon that I think is nearly unique to social media, in the sense that you have that ability to like be surrounded selectively to people who have like that same opinion, but they might not even have had that opinion beforehand, and it kind of just like formats their brain to think like yours, so then you think that your opinion is what's, you know, like the only right one. And I think that it doesn't open up people for conversation of any type. It's just a flock of people having one specific opinion. You know, oh, get ratioed. Okay, so now you're the guy that's right because you ratioed that person. You know, and that's, you know, that whole culture, very, I think, on much on the side of Twitter, but that's, I think where people have felt like they had the most freedom to speak and express themselves on something, because Twitter's always been that place where you just post a banger one liner about something. And I think that that in itself is where a lot of like political tension, but a lot of tension about opinions occurs a lot, because I think that's the issue with Twitter, for example. Whereas with Instagram and other platforms, I think I like to make the focus a little more on how that formats our brains, like cognitively, like deeper insight, like our attention span, as well as other things. So yeah, that's my view on some of the issues of social media, because I think there's just an insane amount of things that could be talked about when it comes to social media.
Yeah, I mean, I absolutely agree. I like the points that you brought up there, of first of all, the echo chambers that you mentioned. Absolutely a huge part of, I believe, what creates an individual on social media, especially if they're not more open to seeking and aware of how social media works. Um, and another one that you mentioned is the different ways of actually trapping people in these echo chambers. Or just all know how you mentioned for example, the use of algorithms. Um, I think a wonderful example that you used exactly is such algorithms such as TikTok, or for example Instagram Reels, and I'm sure YouTube Shorts too, that will bring relevant content to the content that you spend more time watching, that you like, that you share, and so on. And actually quite relevant, however, done in quite the opposite way on Twitter, how while you are brought opinions and views that are more likely to match yours, Twitter also loves to farm, and I'm going to use farm as a word here,
Hmm.
farm attention by introducing opinions and other pieces of media that might extremely contrast yours, in order to just not only have you engage because you'll be obviously disagreeing, but also to push you further into the opposite direction, right? So, and this has been discussed quite a lot, how Twitter will, for example, I don't know, let's give a really arbitrary example here. You dislike the color red, okay?
Hmm.
And you like the color blue. Let's make them opposites for now. Doesn't
Yeah.
matter too much. Um, Instead of someone, you can always open up a conversation with someone like that and discuss the color purple. A little mix between the two, show that both are fine, see if they try to change their mind or if they're more open to the idea of red, for example. Instead of that, Twitter will fucking launch you with a full nuclear strike of someone having the most pretty much apathetic view on the color blue, speaking as representative, or the color red. You know, saying, let's say, I don't know, again, really basic stuff. Uh, Color red is great, blue sucks shit.
Yeah.
Um, and you'll see that, and if you by default like blue, dislike red, now you're like, well, what the hell, this guy sucks. And not only will you engage with it more, most likely, because when people are most likely to engage through anger or sadness, but then you also be pushed more towards the direction of, let's say, blue,
Hmm.
more away from red. Now you've gone from disliking red to hating red, and I think this is while admittedly clever, awful way to exploit, well, the human condition, quite frankly. It's quite an awful way to exploit the human condition, just as it is to push content that is just uh, as prone, or has people just as prone to being manipulated. When you mentioned, for example, the sad dog videos, to have their emotions pretty much manipulated depending on what that content is. Um, it is, and along with that, it is, I think, really relevant to uh, really relevant to also how our brain works in a more literal sense. Because uh, I did. Oh, my video froze. Fantastic. Okay, I'm back. Sorry. I did look into it very shortly. Nothing too grand. But didn't find out anything more than I already knew. That it is all about when it comes to the fundamentals, dopamine. It is the dopamine release. I think uh, it is been pretty much well covered that when you first start out with social media, or for example, when you haven't used it for a prolonged amount of time, you are very, very prone and very sensitive to the release of dopamine that you'll get from being on it. And this may last depending on obviously if it's your first time or if you're returning after a while or if you're returning after just like maybe a few hours or a day or two. This may last you anywhere from, an hour or so to a few days. But that dopamine intake, obviously, eventually your brain inhibits it because it receives such a huge amount. Um, that dopamine intake becomes more difficult to actually obtain, just through the same kind of material. So then what happens is that you, whether it be through doom scrolling, as you mentioned, or through just looking through what people are writing on Twitter, whatever the case is, just you increase your consumption and the amount of consumption of social media, um, while actually gaining less of that reward. And quite frankly, it's quite funny because, for example, in reference with TikTok, you start just to scroll for hours on end, and uh, only get that spike in dopamine every once in a while. Um, it's essentially, I mean, it comes to a point where it becomes essentially a gamble, literal gambling, for just doing the same activity over and over again, uh, hoping and, to be honest, knowing, if you know how these algorithms work, knowing that you'll get that hit, that spike, because a lot of times that's what happens. They will take they'll show you 20 posts, 20 comments, whatever, that all might not be anything incredible to you, and then they'll feed you one to get that dopamine spike, leaving you wanting more. And so you continue consuming that content and just are on this very, very, uh, pretty much just vicious cycle of wanting more and seeking more of this really cheap consumption of dopamine, which obviously then further pushes ideologies, as we mentioned a second ago. So it's an extremely, once you think about it, such a vicious and such a nasty, nasty thing. Such a to basically play such a trick not only on the human brain but also on a person themselves, on their mind and how they think. Because of that, a very actually a very good description of or metaphor that I heard of this is essentially a dog digging in the dirt for a bone. If you see a dog digging in the dirt just randomly outside, knowing that it's looking for a bone, you think to yourself, well, that's kind of sad. It's kind of, to a sense, it's sort of maybe pathetic, or you feel pity for it because it's just digging in the dirt, hoping you'll find like a random fucking bone laying around. Yet that is essentially what is going on with people using such platforms such as TikTok. And I'm going to target TikTok specifically here because it's what brought pretty much the
Yeah.
huge wave of short form content. This is exactly what's happening. I mean, you're not digging the dirt, you're instead scrolling for hours on end until you find that bone, which just so happens to be a post or something that spikes your interest slightly. And let me not even like really compare the two rewards, because a bone will last a dog for maybe an hour or maybe a day or so. That post that you'll find on TikTok will last you a second or a few, right? And then you'll be back at it. So it is comparingly sadder to see people sit and do the same action, gambling away time essentially.
Yeah.
And you also got to think that this whole time this is intentional. This is completely intentional by people that have these corporations that just want to take your time and obviously monetize it on all that good jazz.
It's 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 actually, even for me as a person who I don't consider myself too much as someone who will like feel some sort of empathy for people a lot of the time. I do struggle with that, but despite that, just to think about these things and hear what you have to say about it, and the pity that someone might feel for that dog, for example, I reflect to it and think to myself how depressing it really all seems to be. And again, I don't like to just fold under like the idea that, oh, it's depressing, so we should just cry about it, but it's very like, I think you brought us some things, and I want to add a few things to that. On, for example, you made the great example about how you are seeking that dopamine, and then after 20 posts, you might get another rush, and you're seeking for the next one, and that's obviously an addictive personality. But that's talking more specifically here about the dopamine and reward system that is being set up, and that causes addiction, obviously. But then there's also the side effects of consuming short form content, and I think that's where it gets even more depressing, because obviously one of the things that is noticed, and that probably is already noticed amongst people, and has studies that have been led around it, because I do recall reading something that confirmed that the no one's surprised, but the reduced attention span within our generation has obviously been one of the big impacts that it has had, because obviously the exposure to all those this quick content that's engaging, gets you focused on it, will definitely be make it like much harder to just focus on things. And that's obviously something that you can immediately like assume when you see someone consuming such form of content. But I also think that the natural rewards from doing things like reading a book, going on a walk, having a deep conversation with someone, playing a game that you like, doing a new activity, whatever, those things feel greatly reduced in terms of the reward that you actually end up receiving if you're used to just scrolling and getting that instant gratification. And that's truly a heartbreaking thought, to think that people doing a natural activity, that even playing a video game, which is like, oh, you're getting that dopamine from doing something in a game, but at least in that moment you'll be seeking something and getting the reward within the game from an effort that you make, not from just scrolling up once, or even with your thumb. You're not even using two hands. And yeah, so I really think that that those two things, so obviously the instant gratification and the fact that natural rewards feel less rewarding, also lack of attention span in a lot of people who utilize social media heavily. But then there's also, I think, and this is something that again I relate to directly, I think there is guaranteed an impact on like the memory side of things in an average person's brain, and learning capabilities as well. Just because usually when you're trying to memorize something, you need to retain a certain amount of information. Obviously, when you're learning, you need to be focused, and that's where the attention span from before also comes in play. And so you have, seeing shorter form content and scrolling up a tile and having a brand new piece of information of 30 seconds of length makes you retain less of that information. So I really do think that that it leads to just like a shallower learning abilities from the people who consume that content. And I think the last 2 points I want to make, I'll make 5 points. I won't go too far, but I do want to make one point also around just there is inherently a problem with the isolation in people in society and stuff, and we could touch on that at a certain point as well. But I do think that amongst those kinds of conditions and issues that people experience, there is like a lot of anxiety and stress in this generation. And I do know that this kind of short form content doesn't help either. You get overstimulated by the amount of things that you see as you scroll, and it just fills up your brain. And it's not something that over the millennia of the development of the human race that we've ever really experienced, that amount of scrolling, that amount of information that just slides past. And I think our brain is just not built to deal with this kind of thing. So obviously, when you're the one scrolling, you kind of turn into a little bit of a vegetative state when you're just sitting on your sofa, and scrolling and just seeing more and more information. But in reality, that does contribute heavily to the lack of ability to deal with anxiety and stress. Um, it will cause mental fatigue, even though it doesn't feel tiring at all. It will cause overstimulation, and which can obviously lead to more anxiety, more stress in situations in which your brain would need to have to be focused on the situation you're in, but instead you're used to a different pace of information. Um, and I think the last point I'll make, so you can bounce on it however you would like to, is I think simply that it remains social media, and it's not the exact same thing as Instagram might have been back in 2015, for example, when you're just showing your life and stuff like that. But it's remained social media, so there is a bit of a social comparison problem. And specifically with TikTok, you were bringing up the example of TikTok and how it birthed a lot of these issues and made that short form content like popularized it. Is that TikTok was that like dancing app or whatever, music, dancing and stuff like that. And I think that brought a lot of image. What was in play was a lot of the image of the person you're seeing on screen. Oh, look at their body, look at their face, look at their moves. And I think that self comparison comes in play a lot when it comes to that. And you will have young girls, young boys, young anything, or even people that are older that also see someone that seems in a good shape, and that they there's going to be obsession with those people as well, which again, that's besides social media that can happen. Michael Jackson was before social media, and people were absolutely obsessed with the guy. Same things going on. But I think with social media, there's really, you compare yourself a lot. So there's this self comparison, and your self esteem can be highly reduced by just seeing that idealized content, because that's how it's curated towards. And I think that is a little more general, not necessarily only short form, but it's definitely very like present in the short form content, specifically the people content. Like when someone's telling you about their life or doing some moves or doing like a trend or something, which again I don't have so much experience in because I haven't used TikTok, and I haven't. Whenever I did use Instagram Reels, I didn't have that side of the content. I had brain rot memes, wow, but yeah, I think that the body image and like just the self-esteem with people's body image, with their lifestyle habits, clothing style, amongst many other things, can be put in question for a lot of especially younger audience, because obviously the more grown up you're as an adult, the more you have your own idea on what you want to be, and you identify as like what you are and you're comfortable with it. But especially for the younger ones, I think it duplicates that amount of questioning that they might have towards themselves by having that much content that quickly scrolling through, instead of just seeing one post of a really pretty girl and being like, "Damn, I wish I had her hairstyle." Now it's just like 16 like scrolls in a minute, and you see like 10 different models, and you're like questioning yourself a little bit. So I do think that that's an important point to bring up.
I think that is an absolutely perfect point, actually, because I think throughout this whole talk, me and you, I think we've established that we view the human brain as very much a tool, because of how easily it is influenced and how easily it affects our thinking in future processes. I think we definitely have landed on the point that it can be affected just as easily as influenced to pretty much think what if someone took the time of day to make you think anything they want to, right? Or make you feel a certain way, depending on what they want to get from you. And I think this is a fantastic segue to talk about something a bit more a bit more open, definitely a bit more how shall I call it, out in the air, in a sense, on the subject of if we truly are affected by these things so much, how much of it do we have a say in it ourselves? More specifically, how much free will can we put into the process, right? I would like to transfer the conversation to something more of a topic of free will. And quite frankly, maybe even discussing things such as the future and if ideas about it might, you know, kind of contradict the idea of free will. For now, I'd like to ask, what do you think of free will? And do you think it exists? Do you think there is a level of free will? Or do you think we're, I don't know, complete robots in some sense? Please.
I believe that free will is a concept that does exist, and I think, again, we were talking about subjectivity earlier, and I think that's going to be a lot of the time something that people will have all sorts of various opinions about. But for me personally, with my beliefs and with the way I approach things in life, I love to say that free will is a thing, but I also totally understand if someone were to go against that and tell me, but how about this and that? I mean, you are formatted to act in a specific way, and I can't disagree. You have to pay your taxes, you have to, do all sorts of things that you might not want to do, and you might also have opinions that aren't even your own without realizing it. And I think that free will exists to an extent, but I think that entire free will, where someone is really a free spirit and is able to act totally according to what they really are and what they want to be and do what they want to do, might be one of the rarest things ever. Because at the end of the day, I think we're all quite like heavily impacted by everything that occurs in society, and every opinion that travels through the people, through the media. And I'd like to say that it exists to an extent, but it's never really fully, a part of your life and a part of your, the person that you are. I like to think that you can exert like stronger free will in your day to day life if you allow yourself to think for yourself, and as we were talking about before with social media and the echo chambers and stuff, to be able to find other opinions than your own. For example, that, in my opinion, enables your ability to think more critically, and to see things with a wider scope than just what you always thought was right. I think the most learning I've done in my life is whenever I did expose myself to things that are kind of opposite to what I always believed the things to be and how they functioned. And I think the interesting part is that not in all of those cases I actually changed my mind, but it made me learn more on how people function, and it made me feel more free, because I was less stuck up about my own opinion, but I was opening myself up. And in that moment in itself, I know it sounds extremely simple, but if you open yourself to other opinions, then that will always do you at least a little bit of good, because you will either change for the better or you won't change, but you will understand why people might think a specific way. And I think with free will, I can definitely say that we were just talking about social media, and I'm pretty sure that if you build your opinions based on more than just what you see in there, and what you're getting fed essentially and curated towards, I think you can definitely have be at the closest state possible to really having that free will. However, I think that with the way that society is built, it's really not aiming for people to have those abilities. It's really aiming for people to kind of be, pawns for society. I mean, within education itself, sadly, for the most part, the things that you learn will get you, you know, accustomed a little bit to how society will function and what society will need from you as well. So, my answer to conclude is that it doesn't really exist at its purest form. However, you can be much closer to it or much further to it depending on the decisions that you make in your own life, and depending on who you grow up surrounded by, and what kind of rules you have in your life as a child, what kind of like understanding your own parents and the people around you have, and I consider myself fortunate. I feel that I'm the most free when I'm, for example, out and about in the Alps, just walking through a mountain and I can't see a person anywhere. I'm like, oh, I feel so free. Am I free? Definitely much more in that moment than when I'm back at home at work and I'm within a big city. Sometimes you're more free, sometimes you're less free. What is your experience with it? What's your opinion about it?
I like how you took up definitely more of a societal look on free will and a more personal one as well. I think a lot of times what you were mentioning, however, there was more on the tracks of open-mindedness and stoicism, being able to step back, kind of look through things, even things that you disagree with, through a fresh perspective, and either, as you said, learn from a different perspective, or maybe just change your own perspective. Just either correct yourself for a better person, or just learn something new. The mention of the Alps, for example, as well, I think is a fantastic point to bring. Of, you know, you like the Alps, obviously. You, I believe, grew up also going to the Alps
Yeah.
quite frequently, being exposed to them. So this is kind of an important thing to you. However, wouldn't you also say that that makes it, the fact that you were exposed to the Alps before, or the fact that you like the Alps, is not a choice of your own, and therefore less of your free will than you might think? After all, things that we like or dislike, we don't choose or to like or dislike. A lot of times we come into subject with a pre-bias, or we are given this bias from early childhood, or we find out this bias right in that moment. I mean, you figure out, or most people figure out how they feel about something kind of sporadically. They hear something, or they see something, and they realize, okay, this I don't like. And you don't, obviously you can question, why do I not like it, and so on, and you can have self-reflection. But at the end of the day, way more of like, it's way more non choice. It's not a choice, really. It's kind of a thing that just happens without your input. And even if you decide to self-reflect on it, well, you can always pull this back to, well, why do you self-reflect on this matter? Is this something that you've decided to do on your own, or is this something that you've trained yourself to do throughout time? What started that training? What had you go on this journey of, I don't know, self-discovery or reflection? And is that considered free will? There's a question I'd like to ask you, and I would like to think about, or would like you to think about. And this is probably something that you might have heard before. It's not super uncommon, but if you had a person or a thing that knew exactly in this very moment how every single atom in the universe works, every single atom and its direction, essentially making it predict the future, would that mean that, taking into regard that the future is, you're able to tell the future, and giving the idea that the future is set in stone, take away complete meaning to from free will?
This is going to be a unique way to answer this question, but I'm thinking that it would be even better and more beneficial for anyone that ends up watching this to come up with their own answer, because one of the things is that we've been going on this for about an hour and a half, which is a good format, in case anyone wants to rewatch this in the future. And I also think that I don't actually entirely have an answer to this without giving it a little bit of a thought. It's one of those questions where it's probably a good I would benefit a lot from giving it a proper thought in my own time, and then coming up with what my answer to that might be. Because it's true that I think the question of free will generally like brings up a lot of thoughts for me, and I think to myself like, do we have it? Do we not? And there's a lot of conflicting opinions there. So I think I would like to leave it at that, and I think I would like to leave that as an open question for any person viewing this. Yeah. So I really do think that is a good question to end on, and yeah, um, thanks to whoever was watching. I saw TTV was taken, and thanks for joining me today.
Absolutely, it
We'll
was.
see if we do it again, or if we don't do it again. I did like to have this conversation, and yeah.
Yeah, it was a great conversation. I liked it a lot too. All right,
All right,
then
man.
you enjoy your watch party,
Yes,
and
sir.
yeah, we'll talk later. See ya.
All right. See ya.